For half a century, a mysterious steel safe sat in the corner of Roy Acuff's old Nashville home. Dust collected, paint peeled, and rumors swirled. Acuff, the king of country music, never spoke publicly about its contents, and even close friends claimed they didn't know. When he died in 1992, the safe was quietly moved into storage, forgotten by all but a handful of trusted family members. But in 2025, while preparing an exhibit for the Country Music Hall of Fame, workers were given the green light to finally open it. What they found inside was not just a time capsule, but a collection of items that could rewrite chapters of country music history. And as each layer was revealed, the story grew stranger, more personal, and far more emotional than anyone expected. Before we get to the moment the safe was opened, you have to understand the man who locked it in the first place. Roy Acuff wasn't just another country star. He was the heartbeat of the Grand Ole Opry. Born in Maynardville, Tennessee in 1903, he grew from a small-town boy to one of the most influential figures in American music. His voice carried the pain and pride of rural America, and his songs like The Great Speckled Bird and Wabash Cannonball became anthems that still echo through the halls of the Opry House. But Acuff was more than a performer. He was a businessman, a publisher, and a mentor, shaping the careers of countless artists. He co-founded Acuff Rose Music, the first country music publishing company in Nashville, helping the genre grow from a niche art form into a worldwide industry. Yet for all his public influence, Roy was intensely private about certain parts of his life. Those who worked with him spoke of a man who kept mementos, letters, and personal notes hidden away. Some believed he did so out of humility. Others thought it was to protect people's reputations in an industry where rumors would ruin lives. The safe in question, according to whispers among Opry staff, was purchased sometime in the late 1940s or early 1950s. It was small enough to fit in a study, but heavy enough that moving it required at least 4 men. And while Acuff wasn't known for being secretive with his friends, whenever the topic of that safe came up, he would simply smile and change the subject. Family members recall seeing him put envelopes inside, but never take anything out. Musicians who visited his home remember catching a glimpse of it, but never dared to ask what was inside. Over time, the safe became part of the house's scenery, a silent, unspoken fixture in the life of a man whose career touched millions. And so, when Acuff passed away, the safe's mystery passed with him, at least for a while. After Roy Acuff's death in 1992, his home became a monument to his life, filled with instruments, photographs, and countless memories. The safe remained an enigma. In the early years, his closest relatives debated whether to open it, but the consensus was always the same: not yet. Out of respect for Roy's memory, no one wanted to disturb whatever he had chosen to lock away. The safe was eventually moved into a secure storage area owned by the family, tucked into the back of a climate-controlled room. For decades, it sat there, surrounded by boxes of stage costumes, reel-to-reel tapes, and framed posters from Acuff's long career. The few who had access to the storage space would occasionally dust the safe's surface, but no one tried to open it. Over the years, whispers about its possible contents spread among Opry veterans. Some believed it contained handwritten song lyrics to never-before-heard ACUF originals. Others swore it held early business agreements between ACUF Rose and legendary performers like Hank Williams, Roy Orbison, or the Everly Brothers. The more imaginative rumors hinted at scandal, secret love letters, confidential documents, or even money hidden away for unknown reasons. By the 2000s, the safe had taken on a near-mythical status among country music insiders. It became one of those stories you'd hear backstage at the Opry, spoken with a grin and a shake of the head. One day they'll open that thing, and who knows what they'll find. Yet, no one pushed to make it happen. Then, in 2024, a new exhibit was planned for the Country Music Hall of Fame, one that would spotlight never-before-seen artifacts from Roy Acuff's personal life. As curators dug through his archives, they stumbled across the storage room and the safe. This time, the reaction was different. With family approval, the Hall of Fame team decided it was time. The arrangements were made for early 2025, and a small group was selected to be present when the safe's door swung open for the first time in over 50 years. None of them could have imagined the mix of joy, sorrow, and shock that would follow. It happened on a cold January morning in 2025, inside a quiet back room of the Country Music Hall of Fame. The safe, now positioned on a sturdy steel table, looked smaller than the legends surrounding it, but its weight was almost symbolic. Standing around it were 3 Hall of Fame curators, 2 members of the Acuff family, a photographer, and a locksmith who had been vetted for the job. The atmosphere was hushed, almost reverent, as though they were about to open a time capsule from another century, which, in a way, they were. The locksmith, a veteran with decades of experience, ran his hands over the cool metal surface before leaning in to examine the locking mechanism. "They don't make them like this anymore," he murmured. The dial was worn smooth in spots, likely from Roy's own fingers spinning it all those years ago. After some debate, it was decided not to drill the safe unless absolutely necessary. They wanted to keep it intact, preserving every piece of history it carried. The locksmith worked slowly, listening intently to the faint clicks inside as the room stayed completely silent. It took almost 45 minutes before he finally exhaled, turned the handle, and said the words everyone had been waiting for. "It's open." The heavy door swung outward with a metallic groan, releasing a faint scent of aged paper and cedar. Inside were several neat stacks of envelopes, a small wooden box, and what looked like a rolled-up oilcloth tied with twine. The curators exchanged glances. This was already far more than they dared hope for. The family members leaned in, eyes wide. The first envelope was labeled in neat cursive handwriting, "To be opened after I'm gone." It was dated 1953, decades before Roy's passing. Beneath it, more envelopes carried years written across them like milestones in his life. The wooden box rattled slightly when lifted, and the oilcloth felt heavy, something metallic inside. One curator whispered, "We need to document each step." And so the photographer began capturing every detail before a single seal was broken. No one in the room knew it yet, but the contents would reveal stories Roy Acuff had never told, and truths that could change how fans remembered him forever. The first envelope, dated 1953 and marked "Be opened after I'm gone," was opened with careful hands. Inside was a neatly folded letter written in Roy Acuff's unmistakable handwriting. His words were direct, almost conversational, as if he had anticipated speaking to whoever found it decades later. He began by explaining that the items in the safe were pieces of my life I could never share while I was living. He hinted at promises made, debts owed, not just in money, but in loyalty, and the need to protect certain people from the weight of public eyes. As the curators read aloud, the room fell silent. The letter mentioned names, some long gone, others still recognizable in the country music world. There was a reference to a young singer he had once helped quietly escape a ruinous contract using his own money and influence without ever taking credit. Another passage described his concern over certain business dealings in the early days of Acuff Rose, noting that some agreements were made on nothing more than a handshake and trust, and that the physical proof of those dealings was inside the safe. Beneath that letter were more envelopes, each from a different decade. The ones from the 1960s included personal notes to his late wife Mildred, written during long tours. They were tender, filled with longing, and painted a picture of a man who carried deep loneliness beneath his public charm. One note even described a night when Roy nearly walked away from the Opry for good after feeling the industry was changing too fast, leaving behind the heart and soul he'd built his career on. Then came an envelope from the early 1970s containing an unsigned contract that had never been made public, an agreement between Acuff Rose Music and a then-unknown songwriter whose work would go on to define an era. The name on that paper made one curator whisper, "Oh my God." It was a deal that, had it been revealed, might have rewritten the origin story of several famous hits. By the time the last letter was placed back into its sleeve, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. This wasn't just nostalgia, this was a revelation, and they still hadn't touched the wooden box or the oilcloth. The small wooden box sat on the table like it was guarding something precious. Darkened with age, its surface bore tiny scratches, the kind that only come from years of being handled. A faint smell of cedar and tobacco clung to it, as if it had absorbed decades of Roy Acuff's world. The lid was secured by a tiny brass latch, and when it clicked open, the sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness of the room. Inside, resting on a layer of faded velvet, was a collection of personal keepsakes that felt almost too intimate to touch. The first item was a harmonica, worn and tarnished, its once shiny surface dulled by countless performances. Tucked beneath it was a folded scrap of paper with a set list from an early Opry show. Every song title written in Roy's handwriting, complete with scribbled notes about key changes in tempo. Next to it lay a small silver locket containing 2 miniature photographs, one of Mildred, his beloved wife, and another of a young man in a military uniform, later identified as a cousin who had died in World War II. There was also a strange-looking backstage pass from 1944, issued during a USO tour to entertain American troops. Faded but still legible, it was stamped with military insignia and Roy's name. Perhaps the most startling item was a thick gold ring, engraved inside with the initials of a fellow Opry performer, someone Roy had reportedly clashed with in later years. No one knew they had once shared such a personal token. At the very bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was an old reel of audio tape labeled simply, Acuff, Private. Its meaning was unclear, but the handwriting matched the early 1950s. The family immediately requested it be digitized for preservation, though they were warned that old tape could be fragile and might not survive playback. The weight of the wooden box's contents wasn't in gold or gems, it was in memory. Connections and personal history. These were not the kind of treasures you could sell. They were the kind you protected. And yet, as revealing as the box had been, the oilcloth bundle still sat untouched on the table, promising one last, possibly explosive, discovery. The oilcloth bundle was heavier than it looked, its coarse surface stiff from decades of storage. Dust clung to the creases and the twine holding it shut had darkened with age. Everyone in the room seemed to lean forward at the same time as one of the curators slowly untied the knot. The fabric opened with a faint crackle, revealing the metallic glint of something old, and immediately the air in the room seemed to change. Inside was a stack of objects wrapped in layers of yellowed newspaper from 1951. The topmost item was a pistol, a small nickel-plated revolver with a pearl grip, its metal dulled but still gleaming faintly under the fluorescent light. Tucked beneath it was a folded piece of stationery in Roy's hand. The note explained that the revolver had been a gift from a friend in the business, a performer whose name, when read aloud, drew audible gasps. It wasn't just any friend, it was a Figs.